One of our friends who's not here today is Nancy Gertner, who's a former sitting federal judge in Boston. And we brought her here to John Jay for a talk a little while ago, and that happened, and she stopped her lecture and said, I used to put people in jail for contempt of court when that happened. It won't happen again. That was kind of her point. So, let's wrap up and reflect. After I do one more thing, which I got out of order, the other group that has really contributed tremendously here and has come through with flying colors, among others, so I'm not going to try to honor everybody who made this happen, but in particular, the panel chairs did amazing, amazing, amazing work, and thanks to all of them. So, reflection and wrap up. So the National Network is pretty much in the action on the ground business. That is really our focus. And we care a lot about trying to do the kind of work that has more or less immediate and near-term impact in real places. And then everybody in our business is talking about theory of change these days, and I keep getting asked, do we have a theory of change? So I've come up with one, which is, and that's actually always the way we thought about things. We create facts on the ground and then work from there to demonstrate that things that people might not have thought could be done can in fact be done, that people can work together in new ways, that you really can produce results like that, and then we try to work from that to change the discourse, to move the conversation, to do advocacy, to generate new scholarship, all that kind of thing. In doing that, we work very, very closely and have a tremendous amount of respect for people who work in other ways. So we're embedded in traditional scholarship. We work with people who do advocacy. We work with people who do systems change. We work with people who work on statute and legislation. We work with pure advocates. We work with people in government. And while that's not necessarily our own portfolio, we respect that, we learn from it, and we do everything we can to support their work and their agenda. So this is the end of the conference. We thought we'd end up with a kind of round robin about they work for me, they don't have to listen to me. About whether the conference has worked for you, if things have stood out, what are they, what can we learn from them for next time? If things have not worked and have stood out in other ways, we'd like to hear about it. But really, more centrally, this is a room full of wonderful and committed and active people. And any kind of reflections that you might have on the state of the work that we're all trying to do and where it might go and how not just the National Network can be of support, but how we can help each other do what we're all committed to. So I'm going to ask a couple of people to kick us off on that, and then we'll just go to discussion. And I want to start with Fatima Mohammed, who is here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I know it's getting that time. So David asked me to reflect. This is my first time at this conference, and I thought it would be meaningful to start with my first experience with law enforcement. My father has been in and out of prison since he was 16 years old, and my first experience with a police officer was actually a group of them barreling through our door, looking for my father. So, a drug dealer and was violent and had done things. And he was at home, and they grabbed him, and I watched him being arrested. And my father is trying to talk to me and keep me calm, and of course I'm terrified. And there could be such a vision for public safety that included those stories, that included those realities, that actually consulted with and worked with impacted communities, so that the whole idea of policing being to be protectors and guardians of communities that are fraught with a whole range of challenges, that was even possible. And so when I, after 2 days of being together, I have been moved to tears several times because I have that history, and because I truly believe that we, in our respective corners of the world, are doing God's work, frankly, are doing the work of creating something that we won't even fully get the benefits of. These are our great-grandchildren that will get the benefits of. This will take generations of iterations of a vision. And there is such struggle and power in this work. So there are a couple of things, right? I attended a panel on police culture. And as an advocate and who worked in organizing spaces, we are so value changing laws and policies and being like, that's a win, right? Here, we did it. And this is hearts and minds work, right? It's the hardest kind of work to do. Because as we have all identified, you can have something change one day with one leader and it shift in another administration. And the analysis that we're all holding around this is remarkable. We need more of this. I hope that we have more advocates and activist organizations around to listen and participate. I just hired an organizer, so he attended this conference as his second and third day of work. And he is active in the Black Lives Matter movement. And he talked about how powerful it would be to bring organizers from BLM to this space, the ones who are ready to listen, who recognize that there are some real challenges inside the movement, because they recognize that as much as they are railing against a system and are really expressing how hard it is, they also need to listen to those who are working to figure out different changes and are doing it in lots of different ways. I was so pleased to see the academic community and this desire to get good research done on this, because I think that is an ongoing fight. And I know that as you move on from John Jay, the research that you'll be doing in the future, I'm so looking forward to seeing what you're up to, because we need it. Yeah, we need it. We just need it, and we need new ways of articulating this work. So, this feels like more than a convening or a conference. It feels like an iterative call to action, and so that's just immensely exciting. So I'm so grateful to have met all of you in some small way, and I just look forward to the next one in 2 years. I hope we have opportunities between now and then to be together and to work together.
You're all making this so very easy. So, with a call to academic involvement, I give you Jeff Ward.
Thank you, David, and thank you to all of you. I just want to echo the general point that was made about how inspiring, magnetic this is. This is also my first time being at this meeting. I was telling David the other day, it feels like we should have met a long time ago, and I'm glad that we have now, and I hope to be involved and supportive in any way I can. But I actually wanted to start off, it's almost 4 o'clock. I'm going to start with a reference to wine, because it's something that people might be interested in. And also, More specifically, though, the idea of the microclimate. The microclimate is understood to be a very sort of discrete environment that is more or less conducive to the cultivation of something like a grape. The life chances of a delicious grape are better in some places than in others, and those factors are generations, centuries in the making. The shifting of land mass, the arrival or disappearance of water. I wrote a paper recently called Microclimates of Racial Meaning, Historical Racial Violence and Environmental Impacts. And my argument is essentially that similar to conditions being created that are more or less conducive to the survival of a grape, we have communities where histories have made the life prospects of certain kinds of people more or less positive. Nothing is predetermined, but we know now, based on the evidence I was sharing yesterday in my remarks, that a number of adverse outcomes today can be predicted based upon histories of racial violence. So that what I want to stress in my comments is how important it is for us to understand where these places are and how these dynamics actually work. And at the base of this challenge is data. The fact is that we lack comprehensive data on histories of racial violence that would inform an understanding of kind of how what places these are, how they have become the way they are, and what, most importantly, we might do to intervene. I want to make a few quick points about this data problem that are not academic so much. One is that what I have found in working over the past several years to build this racial violence archive, I've been working with dozens and dozens of students, mostly at the University of California, Irvine, many of them international students, very few of them African American. And one of the things I learned, surprisingly to me, though it's obvious, it'll be obvious to you, was that this was a powerful civic education project for a number of students who have not the experiential basis for understanding this history and its relevance. Every quarter they come to me and say, this is not the America I know. This is not the America I learned about. Are you sure these things happen? And they're learning about their communities. They're not wanting to leave America. They're not dreading being Americans so much as getting a deeper understanding of what this country has been and where we are now in relation to that. So there's power in collecting these data. There's also great urgency. This is a massive country. We cannot simply flip a switch and have detailed records on these histories in every community. One of the greatest limitations of the existing data is that it focuses overwhelmingly on the African American experience. We know very little about how Asian Americans, Latinos, Native Americans have experienced, white Americans have experienced histories of racialized violence and what those implications might be. So there's a desperate need to collect better data, to get networks of people involved at local levels collecting these data. I submit to you that it's beneficial not only to the research, but to the public education, the sort of civic engagement aspect. I also want to share, in closing, that it's not simply a horrible story, although there is a lot of horror in the story. And I'll give you two examples of this. One is that, I've heard a lot of calls recently for the abolition of police. Policing is regarded as fundamentally unjust. There can be no legitimate policing. And as a sociologist, I struggle with that mostly because I think that societies inevitably engage in social control. We will, one way or another, police each other insofar if we're going to continue to exist together. So I find that conceptually difficult to manage. But I also would share with you that when you dig into the historical record, you find examples that defy that narrative. I'll share two with them in closing. One is that oftentimes when you hear about abolition of policing, they say policing is rooted in slavery, the institution of slavery. There's a lot of truth to that, of course. But what you don't hear is that in Illinois, in the antebellum period, free black populations formed their own police forces to protect black residents from who were vulnerable to fugitive slave law. They policed their communities. They were engaged in policing, but they were policing according to a different set of values and norms a different set of political strategies, objectives than was dominant in this country at that time. That too was policing, and a lot of what we've talked about in this conference is more consistent with those values than the values they were competing with at the time. The other example I want to share with you is that though police were often implicated in lynching, either as perpetrators or as bystanders or enablers, police often were also, in many instances, involved in the prevention of lynchings. And another story we don't hear often told is that anti-lynching organizers in the South, for example, had the ingenious plan to award officers with a medal for intervening in the preservation of life by preventing a lynching. So when we talk about these histories, the point of this is to say that it is not simply a matter of talking about all the terrible things that have been done in our past, all the various ways white supremacism has manifested in terror. There are a number of those stories that have to be talked about and engaged. But there are complexities to these narratives that I think when we engage them will bring us together, will help us understand better who we are and what traditions we might continue to build upon, traditions that even go back over a century. Thank you.
Thank you. So David asked me to think about sort of what this conference has meant to me. And what I'll say is that as I go around the country, as I have been to many conferences in my life, what I typically see are disciplines that meet with themselves. You see police meeting at PERF or IACP. You see scholars at the, I always get it wrong, ASC and whatever the other one is.
That's pretty much what ASC is.
That's what they are, right? ASC and whatever the other one is. Scholars meet with themselves. Law enforcement meets with themselves. Community organizers typically meet with themselves. Victim advocates go to national meetings by themselves. This is a space that now, and for quite some time, but even more so now, is a space where we're all in the room together. And that is so important because we add richness to each other's stories, we challenge each other's assumptions, we add information to each other's narratives that you didn't have otherwise. We challenge each other. You think twice about saying something because the other's in the room. They're right there. You're not able to just spin out something because all of your friends and family are there to root you on. You don't just throw red meat to the crowd. You talk sensibly and thoughtfully, and there are people there to listen and learn from each other. And I really appreciate that about the National Network, the National Initiative, and John Jay generally. So thank you, Jeremy, for making it that kind of place, right? For those of you who don't know, I always have to say we're married, so I can do things like that, right? But I also want to say what this particular conference has meant. This time around, I noticed, and I just think it's really kind of amazing. Nobody was explaining the fundamentals of focused deterrence. It was all like, you all get ceasefire, now let's talk about this. Let's talk about this particular aspect of it. Or let's talk about this new thing that we're doing with our gang work or with our shooting meetings. Or let's talk about the new way that we're reaching communities and doing community outreach. We're beyond let's explain and let's get your buy-in for focused deterrence. So I think that's worth noting. And congratulations to you for that. How does it feel to be establishment, David? The second thing I note, besides that we all are we have this common vocabulary now, which is really helpful. I think we are also at a point where we're all talking about sort of similar kinds of ideas. And it was a beautifully structured conference to get us talking about building empathy, procedural justice, implicit bias, but how we can demonstrate empathy. And we had several plenary sessions where, either explicitly or not, that was the theme that I got from it, sort of how do we actually demonstrate empathy. there was one particular moment, and we talked about this at lunch. There's one particular moment that I'd like to highlight, and this is you asked for suggestions for the future, how you can be helpful. This is what I picked up on. In this morning's plenary, which I absolutely loved, I loved listening to everybody. In this morning's plenary, there was a moment where Bishop Harris, are you in the room? No? Okay. So we had a lot of discussion about sort of conversations, settings, the importance of promoting and demonstrating empathy. And we were talking about that, and everybody was giving their perspective on how to do that. And then there's this moment where Bishop Harris says, so when the mother came to the officer and said, I want to find, I think it was Bishop Harris, correct me if I'm wrong, I want information about this homicide. And the cop said, I can't give it to you, it's against policy. And then that officer went up and was told, things are different now, you can give out that information. What happened to me was, I was sitting there, I'm now working for the NYPD, and I thought, that's what we're trying to do every day, is figure out how to operationalize it. How do you not just say, we need to have these conversations and learn and experience empathy and demonstrate it by being more in touch with everybody's humanity, but how does it actually change your policies and protocols? And what are you doing? So, example A, we changed the protocols so that we are communicating more regularly with survivors of homicide. In the NYPD, we've just started a practice where all homicide detectives are asked to identify a family liaison, one person. It's easier for the family, it's easier for the police department, just that, and asked to be in touch with them regularly, at least every month, the first 6 months after a homicide, and then regularly after that. And we're training on that, and we're talking about that. That's a procedure that demonstrates empathy. And if I were going to say, what would I like next time around? I'd like more concrete examples of terrific things that police departments and others are doing around the country so that we can learn from each other how to demonstrate what we're learning. We're learning procedural justice, we're understanding implicit bias, we get focused deterrence, but there's a whole world of law enforcement out there. There's a whole world of victim service provision out there. There's a whole world of scholarship out there that is learning how to identify concrete ways that we all can do better. And that's what I'd like to see at the next conference.
So, Jennifer, you are a real live program officer at a major American philanthropy, which I'm not going to name because otherwise we'll hunt you down and kill you. Everybody in this room nearly lives by raising money. That's how we do what we do. So you've been here for 2 days. If you can put yourself in the mind of an abstract funder, what do you take away from this?
I don't know if I can do the abstract. I can do the concrete because I am a part of a very large foundation, Open Society Foundation. There, I named it. But let me tell you why I'm here and why David asked me to speak, why I came to this, and why I was so excited by the opportunity to learn with all of you. My background, I came to Open Society from ACLU of Washington in Seattle, where I spent about over a decade doing police reform on the community side. Before that, I was an even more beloved by most police officers criminal defense attorney. And what I learned, and my work was primarily focused, at least initially, in Washington State, was that there's this cycle of sort of crisis, community attention, blue ribbon panels, recommendations, lots of media, and then no change. And having been involved in that process for a while, I realized that it was really time to start doing things differently. And I had the opportunity to work with folks in Seattle, Spokane, King County, on trying to find some different way to go about engaging both community and the police. And you know, I think that we started to develop some success. The reason I was hired by Open Society Foundation was that they were looking at finding a way for philanthropy to engage in this work strategically. Usually philanthropy identifies the well-established organizations, gives a check, and then that organization goes off and does the work. This isn't an area that has, at least on the community side, that kind of organization. Because there are 18,000 police departments in this country, there are potentially 18,000 different community groups that could be engaging in this work. And so we needed to find a way to strategically engage with those groups and figure out a way to get funding out to them. So I was brought on with the very exciting task of developing this portfolio. And what we want to do really is to find a way to get the resources out to the community in the most effective way. Before I started, there was a field scan. I guess that's a philanthropy thing too. You kind of figure out what's out there and what the needs are. And the thing that kept coming back to us, and I experienced this myself when I was doing the advocacy work, is that there is a real lack of information on the part of community groups. They know what they don't want. They don't want people shot. They don't want to be treated with disrespect. They want to be safe. They want to feel safe. They don't want to feel unsafe when they see a police car drive by. But they don't know how to get to what they do want. And so one of the things that we're working on is trying to figure out ways to get that information out and get the resources out to the community. When Chief Kirkpatrick was appointed or accepted the position in Oakland, I was really struck by one thing she said. I didn't tell you this. That she's not interested in reforming the police department, but transforming. And I think that's become the theme that we've been working on. And so we're really looking at organizations that are interested in transforming, not just going to the police department and saying, you know, stop doing this, stop doing that, but to look more at what they can do and how they can engage. So I was really impressed by a lot of the work of this, not just the ceasefire work. I mean, I'm aware of that, but hear it in more detail, particularly this morning hearing from the panel on the from Oakland and from New Haven about the community police partnerships. Thought that was just fantastic. The plenary this morning too was fantastic as well, to hear all of these ways that community groups are finding to really develop that relationship. We talk kind of like we're going to develop community trust, or we're going to rebuild community trust. These are some places there never was trust to begin with, so you can't really rebuild what never existed. But developing that kind of trust, that's the kind of thing that we're looking for. If you're looking for advice on how to get money out of Open Society Foundation, I'm afraid I don't have that good advice. But there are, I can say that one of my tasks, and one that I take very seriously, is to work with other large philanthropy and try to get more money into this field, because there's a desire to do something. From 2014 on and all of the high-profile incidents, there's been a lot of hand-wringing and what do we do? I think that we're starting, and I hope that Open Society is going to be the lead in finding an answer to give to philanthropy on these are things that you can do. So we're working on it. I'm here because I'm interested in the work that you're all doing. I have connected with some great folks, and I appreciate the open conversations. And I don't, the only thing I would say do differently is let's get more of my colleagues on board. So in 2 years, you'll have more foundations here to hear this great work, so there are more opportunities for funding.
I'm going to tell a story. My father was an auto engineer, and he worked at Chrysler in Detroit. Are the Detroit people still here? Detroit gets messy in the winter. And he came home laughing hysterically one night because one of his colleagues in the office had gone out for lunch, come back from lunch, and the whole side of his car had been smashed in. And there was a note under the windshield wiper, and it said, "As you can see, I lost control of my car on the ice and snow and hit yours really badly. And there are a whole bunch of people watching, and they think I'm leaving you my name and address, but they're wrong." Michael Frederick thought he had escaped being singled out for making the video, but he's wrong. So thanks for all of that. So over to you. Thoughts, comments, advice, networking. Harry.
For those of you that I haven't met, my name is Perry Tarrant. I'm the current president of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. Had the opportunity to work with both administrations, both the Obama administration and now the current president's administration. Definitely an interesting transition. Had the opportunity to work on the transition team in selecting a lot of the folks who've been appointed or that were supposed to be appointed to different offices during the current administration. I was telling David earlier that back in February, we were asked to participate with the Justice Department in helping them write their law enforcement strategy for the Trump administration. A pretty difficult task if you've been paying attention to any of their rhetoric at all. But I say all that to say this. Number one is that the work you're doing is outstanding. It validates what I've been saying and others been saying for the last, since the election, and that is all policing is local. It doesn't matter what the national rhetoric is, but more importantly, the work being done on the ground at the grassroots level is what's going to change not only policing, but change the country. Fast forward to yesterday, I get an email from the Justice Department or its contractor who's actually doing the publication on the law enforcement strategy for the Trump administration, saying that there's been too much back and forth, and they're ultimately going to go ahead and publish their strategy next week. A few more emails today, back and forth, and we're all getting back together next week at Justice to try to convince them to tamp it down to a more civil tone. So I say all of that to say that when it comes to policing, and Terry can back me up, Terry Cunningham, who spoke day one or yesterday, it's all a blur, he can attest that when we're sitting around the table, both in the White House, under both administrations, and having these conversations, it is a difficult conversation. We've had a number of difficult conversations over the years. I've been in Ferguson and virtually every community that you've heard of over the last couple of years in the capacity of Noble. I get to go home for a couple of days to Seattle, or where my day job is, before I come back to DC next week. But the work and the conversations that have transpired over the last couple of days really reinforces it's local and it's your work. And your police departments are defined by you, not by the administration and not by your individual chiefs. No chief, no sheriff stays in position without community support and without the work of the community. So in terms of partnership and partnership building, Jeremy, I got to say that Noble has enjoyed the relationship with John Jay for years. David, thanks for your support and continued interaction with our organization. But the success is sitting right here in this room.
Thanks for that, Perry.
What I worry about is that this conversation can be knocked down with a tsunami called terrorism, and that policing in the age of terrorism is something we can't ignore. I've spent 25 years as an American police chief, and I've seen conversations drowned overnight. And I'm wondering how we do that. It's hard for me to believe I'm in my hometown, and part of the police department is working under Susan Herman, trying to figure out how to connect closer to the community, and part of the police department is deciding what type of new automatic weapons to carry on Fifth Avenue on high-density populations in case there's a terrorist attack. And how do you recruit for both those type of employees? How do you train for both those type of employees? How do you exist with both those type of employees? So I would rather have David and Jeremy invite that other side of the room to this conversation than to have it without them. And the experience I draw on is I was a chief of a city called Stamford, Connecticut, north of New York on September 11th. And I saw that the attack was in my hometown, but I saw how it affected my working town. That people bring their fear home, and they bring their anger home. And the next week we had Stamford was one of the cities that had one of the fake anthrax attacks. And I saw real fear in my community. Fear that would allow the police to do anything. So I'd like David and Jeremy to think about bringing the other people to the room, because I'm afraid of that tidal wave coming. Thank you.
That is good advice, Dean. Thank you.
Thank you, David. My name is Senator Jeff Barron. I'm from Bermuda. I'm the Minister for National Security, and it's been a pleasure to be here the last 2 days, and I think what I can say is that it's a lot of it has been uncomfortable to hear about. I have a budget of $149 million for public safety for a small island with a population of 64,000 people. I talk about budgets because there are so few legislators, politicians, that control where the money is spent for public safety that come to these. And if I could help you twist arms, if I'm not sure if they're invited and they don't come, but you have to have more people in the room. You have to create that uncomfortable feeling to the legislators, to the politicians who are controlling the budgets, because it's all well and good when you have the NGOs or you have other charitable organizations that are donating and making these things happen. But if you are not going to, as a politician or legislator, put your skin in the game and your money behind this very program, then you are not going to see the results. That's the end of it. And so while it is uncomfortable to hear about the history, the legacies and racial issues, it's the same in Bermuda. 64% of the island are people of color. And so when we talk about a new vision for public safety, if you're not having the people in the room that are going to fund that to happen, then it will remain a vision and unlikely a reality. That's my 2 cents. Thank you.
First of all, let me just say what's on my mind, which is how wonderful this is and how great it is to have been part of the National Network family and journey to this point, and I'll, of course, continue to be. But I have a thought, it pivots both off of what Jeff Ward said and what Dean Esserman said. So I was sitting in the plenary session this morning, really enjoying it. It was very, very moving and a nice addition to the program. And I was tweeting. So I've got my iPhone working and get this news alert. And the news alert was that President Trump has just announced in a formal way his administration's decision not to deport students protected by DACA. So I get this reminder that, oh, that's right, I'm a college president, I have students, I got to think about them. So the tweets that go out at that moment are to our students and to say, congratulations, this must be a big relief, thinking about you and your families. And I'm listening on the stage to a powerful statement by an African-American woman talking about how concerned she is about the well-being of her son. So unless I missed it, what's not present here in this conference in the way it should be is a concern about the use of law enforcement powers to enforce immigration laws. And Jeff Ward reminds us that at the other end of enforcement power are often minorities that are defined in other ways by national origin or religious affiliation or some other attribute. And those of us who do work on mass incarceration are often reminded that we don't pay enough attention to the use of immigration detention facilities as another exercise of state power. And so the students here at John Jay, we're a Hispanic serving institution. 42% of our students are Latino. And when we had our sort of community meetings here after the election of Donald Trump, the highest level of anxiety was among those students who they themselves or their parents or extended families felt, whether it was an objective reality or not, felt, so that was their reality, highly vulnerable to the enforcement of the law. So the police that they worried about may not have been the NYPD, but there was also concern that spilled over there. But it was certainly the federal officials who would come in their way of being concerned through the doors of their homes, or would come to their college and pick them up and send them back to where they may never have been or hadn't been since they were 2 years old. So I think the trust issue, when Dean says we have to worry about is there another terrorism attack, how that sort of ripples effect. We've had a version of that through the immigrant communities in ways that I think, and maybe it's we've been a little protected here from it, it affects the standing of law enforcement and the police agencies and government and the power of the state in those communities in ways that we still haven't fully accounted for. And I think that we need to, if we want to talk about a vision of safety in the way it was described in our opening this morning, which is to feel safe in your family and to feel safe at home and to feel that you're protected from those powers. And if those powers are exercised against you, at least you have legal recourse. And that's not the way a lot of our students feel. And thankfully today there's a little bit of a breather, but still there's a lot of fear within those communities, and it's a fear of the state.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Laurel Boatwright, and I'm an assistant United States attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. So when I say that, for most folks, that reads as Atlanta. I'm not from Atlanta originally. I'm from Texas. And coming to Atlanta and being a federal criminal prosecutor in Atlanta has been life-changing for me for a lot of reasons, but not the least of which is because my former boss, Sally Quillian Yates, tapped me to do something very innovative and different, which was a drug market intervention, which I'm sure many of the people in this room know what that is, but I did not know at the time, for a particular neighborhood in Atlanta that had had its reasons for distrusting the police and needed the kind of impact that a drug market intervention can provide. I say all of that to you by way of introduction and also to lay some context, because in response to what one of the very few politicians in our midst had to say, which I appreciate your perspective on that as a policymaker and someone who actually has the access to the budget, and also following up on what the last person just said, Georgia, Georgia's a pretty red state. There has been a subtext, a very thin, professional, respectful, and civil subtext of things are changing at the national level, which is obviously the case. But I don't know how many of you know what Governor Nathan Deal has been up to in the state of Georgia, but he's a very, very Republican governor who came up through the system and has pretty much single-handedly through his leadership been convincing a state and changing hearts and minds one at a time to engage in widespread systematic criminal justice reform of the state laws in Georgia. And he's done so by virtue of his leadership, and also I'm not advocating for the man, let me be clear. Also, I'm from the Department of Justice, so I can't advocate, so officially. I just wanted, to the extent that y'all may not have been aware of that, I wanted to say that just because I find that to be an incredibly hopeful truth right now. That there are allies and people who are open to being persuaded by the unavoidable truth that is results. And the results that happens when people in this room put their minds together and put programs in place, you cannot argue with reduced crime and saved lives. And that is not a partisan thing, that is not a red thing, that is not a blue thing, that's not an anything thing. And I guess I felt like I wanted to say that because I'm very optimistic right now. I'm very optimistic. And I'm optimistic because not just because of who you all are and what you're doing, but because there is room to believe that people will be persuaded by good faith and by the efforts that everyone in this room is engaging in. And maybe y'all didn't need to hear that. Maybe I was the only one that needed to say that, but we just never know where help is going to come from and who your ally is going to be. And I don't know, just sort of wanted to say that.
Hi, I'm Sharon McBride, South Bend, Indiana, Director of Community Corrections, and I just wanted to know what role could or should community corrections play in this strategy, if someone could help.
Vinny here? No. Then no, nobody can tell you. So let me just say a couple of things. One is, so just speaking for the national network for a moment, and I said we home in on actual, on the ground, practical, real people, real world work. In all of the interventions that have come out of this line of thinking, community corrections has been central. Community corrections, in a way, does everything, right? So if we think about what we always think of as the Trinity, it's the right kind of law enforcement, the right kind of community engagement, the right kind of outreach and support. You do all of that. And so that's turned out to be really, really central in a whole range of practical work. When, for example, it turned out that one could do amazing things in violence prevention by having direct, respectful engagement with offenders, the beginning of that was through probation and parole. All right? And that has continued forever. Mark Kleinman here has taken a lot of these ideas. Note the way I just claimed Mark's work. That was, and mapped that onto probation and parole, and now some other things. And what's now known as swift, certain, fair is not just practical work on the ground. It is wholesale system reform that is transforming community corrections in a lot of places. And then this is all a work in progress. Everything, certainly, that we do, everything that's been talked about over these last 2 days, it is all a work in progress. And if we think of what I think of as the basics here, which are first do no harm, strengthen community capacity, strengthen the community role, strengthen community governance as much as possible. Use actual law enforcement as absolutely minimally as possible. Conduct yourself with respect, get legitimacy right. That's potential for community corrections as it is for all of our official agencies every single day in ways that are changing all the time. So that's not as good an answer as Vinnie Schiraldi would have given, but it's the best I could come up with on the spot.
So if I may, let me try a different version of that. They're consistent, but different. So none of this can get done without fixing the mass incarceration problem. All right? We've got 7 times as many people in prison as any civilized country. So when the Cut 50 movement says we need to reduce prison population by 50%, I say you're pikers. We need to reduce prison population by 80%. That would get us back to our historic level. So that's a huge challenge. And only community corrections can deal with that. I mean, if we're not going to send people to prison, then we got to do something else. So the question is, what's the something else? Right now, that something else has way too many conditions. Typical probation sentence has 60 conditions. Nobody can obey 60 rules, right? So radically pare back the conditions to ones that either help prevent crime or help that person get his life back in order. Don't have any condition where you can't monitor whether he's doing it, and don't have any condition where you're not prepared to respond swiftly and certainly and fairly every time he doesn't do it. And figure out, I mean, the risk rules are out there now. You don't need anything as nearly as elaborate as a compass, right? You can do a risk assessment in an afternoon with records that are in front of you. Decide what 50% of your population desperately needs a good leaving alone, and give them that, and give them the rest swift, certain, fair supervision. And not just swift, certain, and fair sanctions for misconduct, swift, certain, and fair rewards for compliance and achievement. And we could transform the community correction system into a way of getting people back on track. And we could then start applying that to the extra 2 million people we now have behind bars. So that's the quick version.
Hello, my name is Oscar Contreras, and I want to thank everybody for, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Kennedy, for being here. But I would like to thank the outgoing president, because I've been here for 2 days, and I came here to thought the conference was going to be a little bit different. But what I wanted to hear, I wanted to see, and I respect everybody here, color, race, and religion, and police, and everyone. But what you said about the Hispanic, the young kids, the DECA, and that's something that we're facing, the Latino population is facing. The discrimination, what's going on. We have our murder rates are in Chicago and in Los Angeles and all that. But I haven't heard nothing in this conference about that. And I hope next year that maybe we can focus on some of that. None of our presenters were Hispanics. Nothing was focused on Hispanic. And we're dealing with the same thing. And I think right now we're dealing with the immigration population that we are the bad persons, that every Hispanic is the drug dealer, the terrorist, the gang member. And there's a lot of good people in our community. And I'm privileged to work with the Chicago people that we want to try to change that. So I want to thank you all, and Mr. President, you made my day.
And I can promise that. So thanks for that. Who wants the last word? Next to last word.
Yeah, Chris taught me that. So first, I would just like to thank everyone because I got so much, but I need to tell you a story. So I have 5 kids under 4, right? And so I also have 4 jobs. And once a year, my family allows me to have 1 week for myself. And I had picked this week because I was going to make it back home in time for Father's Day. But I picked this week to go to Cuba. And so when I got the invite to come here, I rearranged everything, right? Trip, place to come, all that. And then I woke up yesterday and heard the president is going to do something about our access to Cuba. So I really started rethinking that decision that I made, right? Because I really, but I knew this was important, right? I've been coming here for 4 years now. And every year I come, I learn something new. And I'm inspired when I leave here to do more. And so that's what this trip was for me this time, even though it was my vacation and I could have been laying on the beach with a handmade Cuban cigar. But I'm here and the weather has changed and I have one more day here, so I don't know what's going to happen, right? But I'm saying all that to say is that the one thing that I do believe we need to do, because I am director of community organizing in Chicago for West Side Health Authority, and I do the custom notifications and the call-ins for the whole West Side. And what I do know is that, or what I hope is that we would bring some people from around the country that are on the edge, right? Those that we're working with, those that we see as difficult to make that change, to bring them here to see the work that's going on their behalf, right? Because we have to create more leaders, right? We have to create more people who have connections to the folks that are doing the violence, right? We can't, now, I must admit, I am a former individual who was a violent individual. In 1984, I shot somebody at a high school over a drug deal that went bad. I was 17 years old. I never went to prison for it, but I didn't learn anything either, because 5 years later, I was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. And so, but I made that transition. But the folks that I work with, that transition is hard, right? It's hard. And I think if they were exposed to, and I'm always looking for things to expose them to. And so my thing is, if we could bring people who we work with, now they don't have to be a lot, but if we bring 4 every 2 years and let them see what is going on, because some people don't know this exists, right? They don't know that this is possible, right? They don't know that folks are really putting themselves out there for them and for the community and for the world, right? And I think that exposure will help us recruit more people to do this work, and we will change more lives impactfully that way. And so I thank every one of you. I'm excited that I did come here instead of Cuba. I probably would never make it in my lifetime now, right? But I do thank everyone, and I thank David. David is an inspiration to me, and he don't even know it, and Paul too, right? And if you see Paul, he has on a tie that belongs to me, and so, no, I just love everything that's going on here and everybody that's doing it. And I'm going to get out of here because I have someone waiting on me to help me finish my vacation, all right?
So the thing I've always loved the most about being part of all of this is the people, as I said at the beginning. And I'll tell you frankly that I was terrified about this event because the first 2 were so good, and I really, really, really wanted the office to rise to that occasion again, and the first 2 were so good that I was really fearful about that. Now I'm just going to be even more worried the next time. And I'm thinking about these last couple of days, and there's something different about this one. So it has been exceptionally wonderful, and as in the first 2, a tremendous amount of important sharing of information and perspective, and meeting wonderful folks, and no different this time. What is a little bit different this time is that there was a consistent level of challenge in the room that is thankfully part of the national discourse right now. Right? Things have changed since the last time we did this. In my view, they have changed for the better. And that came into our process and into our rooms, and I know that at various times people were made from somewhat to considerably uncomfortable by what was going on and what was being said, and I shared in some of that. And so I want to close with this, which is that we keep mentioning this DOJ national initiative. One of the national initiative sites is Minneapolis, and the mayor of Minneapolis is a woman named Betsy Hodges. And Minneapolis has been in very, very severe turmoil over police community issues for a couple of years now. And Betsy's been in the center of all of that. And I was on the phone with her a little while ago, and she was talking about some particular event that had made a bunch of white folks and people in positions of power and authority really uncomfortable. And she said, I like that. The distribution of discomfort has been really lopsided for a long time. So part of what I really liked about this is that we are redistributing the distribution of discomfort. And I take that as a real marker in this work, in our collective relationships, and I'm delighted to have been able to be part of a convening in which that happened, and which I think that was very productive. So thank you very much. Godspeed, and see you in 2 years.